Stamp duty and council tax could be scrapped and replaced by a new property value tax. Let me show you what's actually being considered, how a house value tax might work, the winners and losers, rumours versus reality for this autumn, a calculator so you can test your own numbers, and a refund trap where thousands of people overpay stamp duty and never get it back. So if you've bought recently, check this. And if you're planning to buy, keep this in mind or you could overpay thousands. What's being considered? The Treasury is examining replacing stamp duty on main homes with an annual property tax for properties worth more than £500,000. They are also looking at reforming council tax. How might a house value tax work? So the annual house value tax or proportional tax would become payable based on the value of the property, and initially it would be for those properties over £500,000. So for example, 0.54% per year on the proportion above £500,000 plus 0.278% on the proportion above 1 million. This is to protect mid-price homes but raise more from very high value homes. For example, a house costing £600,000. The stamp duty currently would be £20,000. Under the new system using 0.54%, no stamp duty would be due up front, but an annual charge would be applied, which would be £540 per annum for the duration the house is owned. Example B, a house costing £1.2 million. The stamp duty currently would be £63,750. Under the new system, 0.54% each year on the proportion from £500,000 to 1 million, plus 0.278% on the proportion above £1 million, so £200,000, which in total would be £4,336 per annum for the duration the house is owned. This got me thinking, and I wanted to share with you some of the problems with stamp duty. One of the biggest problems with stamp duty today is how messy and confusing it's become, not just expensive. For example, if you buy your new home before selling your old one, HMRC charges the additional 3 to 5% surcharge because in that moment you own two properties. But here's the catch. Once you sell your previous main home, you're entitled to a refund of that extra tax. The issue? Thousands never claim it back, so you must apply it manually. And if you miss the deadline, that's money gone. It's a perfect example of how stamp duty land tax complexity catches out ordinary buyers and why there's a growing pressure for a simpler, fairer system like an annual property charge. So beyond refunds, here are some of the other problems with stamp duty. It discourages mobility because it's at a big upfront cost when buying. So people stay put for longer than they otherwise would. It impacts downsizers. So for example, older households wanting a smaller place face a large tax bill, so they don't move, keeping larger homes out of circulation. Combined, these two issues mentioned above lead to the misallocation of housing. Smaller families stuck in smaller homes and older couples in larger ones. For example, a retired couple living in a 4-bedroom house worth £800,000 would like to downsize to a £500,000 flat, but the move would trigger around £15,000 in stamp duty on the purchase, so the result is they stay put. The big house doesn't free up for a family and the housing chain gets stuck. Stamp duty reduces transactions and market efficiency. For example, every time the rate is raised, sales volume drop. It's a transaction tax, so it hits activity directly. A less liquid housing market harms labour mobility, so it's harder to move for work. Stamp duty is unfairly distributed. For example, two households with homes of the same value can pay very different tax depending on whether and when they move. Long-term owners pay nothing while recent movers shoulder all the burden. For example, family A bought their house for £200,000 in 2015. They paid £0 in stamp duty since, no matter how much the house has risen in value. Family B buys the same style house next door in 2025 for £400,000. They must pay about £10,000 in stamp duty immediately, assuming they are moving home. Same houses, same services, but one family pays thousands because they moved more recently. Stamp duty distorts prices, for example. Thresholds like the £250,000 or £925,000 create price bunching, where homes are deliberately priced just below a band. This makes the market less rational. Sellers often reduce the asking prices to keep buyers interested. Stamp duty can be volatile and inefficient revenue source. Stamp duty receipts rise and fall with the housing cycle, making it unreliable for the government budgeting. Economists often describe it as one of the most inefficient major taxes relative to the distortions it creates. For example, in 2007-2008, stamp duty brought in nearly £14 billion. During the financial crisis, it collapsed to under £6 billion. This basically makes it harder for governments to plan their finances. Compare that to an annual property tax, which would bring in steadier revenue regardless of transactions. Stamp duty discourages investment and flexibility. It can deter people from moving closer to new jobs, investing in second homes, or rebalancing portfolios. This can hurt productivity and local economies. A reoccurring annual property tax based on the value, like council tax reform or a proportional property tax, would spread the burden more evenly, reduce distortions, and be harder to avoid. What changes are the government looking at in terms of council tax? Council tax is a yearly local charge based on bands still linked to 1991 values in England. Councils set the rate each year and you get a bill for your band. Why people say it's broken? The bands are pegged to 1991 valuations, so bills can feel regressive. A modest home in one area can pay a bigger share than a higher value home elsewhere. There are some recent changes you should know about. Councils can now add premiums for the following: long-term empty homes, premium after 1 year empty rising with time. Second homes, many councils can charge up to 100% extra from April 2025. So in terms of council tax, the government is looking potentially to update values so they can charge a fairer council tax based on a property's value. The problem with this now is how they go about valuing properties and the amount of time and resources that would take to implement, and how often they would be reviewed given values can increase, decrease, or remain the same. It's important to note that the reported plan to replace stamp duty with an annual property tax does not scrap council tax. Council tax continues unless there's a separate reform. Rumour versus reality for this autumn. This type of reform could take years, especially in terms of replacing council tax and the national revaluations that would be required. I recently converted a house into 5 flats, which completed in January 2025. Only now have the Valuation Office Agency, the VOA, assigned bandings to the new apartments, so that the tenants can now start to pay council tax. The current process took 9 months. Implementing a new national revaluation would take a serious amount of time. A realistic first step would be an annual levy that starts for homes sold after the change, with amounts updated each year. Existing owners would be charged retrospectively. There are always going to be winners and losers, so if stamp duty is scrapped and a new property tax is brought in, the likely winners are going to be people who are able to get on the property ladder quicker, as they are no longer need the upfront stamp duty amount when buying a property. People who also move around a lot will benefit as the upfront cost goes away, resulting in more mobility. The losers are likely to be owners of higher value homes who will face a new annual bill instead of a one-off charge. If this policy is phased in, so if the government decides to apply the property tax to new purchases, and existing owners who have paid stamp duty won't have to pay this annual property tax. The new annual property tax is likely to be another cost that homeowners will have to take into account. They will have to pay this every year. What this might mean is that mortgage lenders might take this into account when assessing affordability. One of the other main issues is that tax would apply forever. So for example, on a £600,000 home, today's one-off stamp duty is £20,000. Under the annual property tax at 0.54%, that's £540 per year. After about 37 years, you've paid the equivalent of the stamp duty. Every year after that is extra because the annual charge never ends. So does this feel like a fair tax? An annual property tax does feel unfair if you stay put for a long time because it never ends. Why does it feel unfair? You keep paying forever. So after say 10 years you've paid £5,400, after 20 years £10,800, and in 30 years £16,200 versus a one-off charge of £20,000 today. Cash poor, asset rich owners such as retirees get a new annual bill they didn't have before. Long stayers subsidise movers. Frequent movers save the big stamp duty hit. Long-term owners pay more over time. There are some reasons why some people are calling this fairer. For example, lower barriers to move or buy. It helps first-time buyers and right-sizers as there's no big upfront cost. The tax is linked to value, so that higher value homes pay more each year and the revenue is steadier for the government when compared to, say, lumpy stamp duty tax. A fairer approach could incorporate some of the following. Buyers could have a choice at purchase. So for example, buyers could pick a one-off stamp duty charge or the annual charge locked in for that ownership. Create a cap on the total number of annual payments under the new system at the stamp duty equivalent. So for example, stop paying after 37 years on a house worth £600,000, or the annual charge ends after N number of years. Deferral options for cash poor owners, allowing rolling up the annual tax until sale with interest. Low income or even retired owner occupiers. Primary home allowance. So the first certain amount of a main residence is exempt to keep bills down for ordinary owners, second homes and investments pay more. Lifetime or 10-year caps. So annual tax runs maximum 10 years per ownership and then stops. On a £600,000 home, today's stamp duty is £20,000. An annual property tax at 0.54% is £540 per year. You hit £20,000 in about 37 years, and everything after that is extra. That's why I think any reform needs fairness guards, like a cap equal to the old stamp duty land tax, a deferral for low income owners, or letting buyers choose between the annual charge and the one-off. Test your numbers in 30 seconds in a link in the description. For example, if you were to buy a property for £600,000, then you would add £600,000 into B2 in the inputs tab. The next tab, stamp duty land tax, would show you that the current stamp duty would be £20,000. The following tab, APT onward, shows what the annual proportional tax would be, which in this example would be £540 per annum. This tab also shows you how many years it would take to break even if you compared it to the new system with the current system. So in this example, it would take 37 years. Now let's look at a property worth 1.2 million. You would change cell B2 in the inputs tab to 1.2 million. The next tab, SDLT current, would show what the current stamp duty would be, which in this example would be £63,750. The following tab, APT onward, shows what the annual proportional tax would be, which in this example would be £4,336 per annum. This tab also shows you how many years it would take to break even if you compared the new system with the current system. So in this example, it would take roughly 15 years. The final tab, onward price points, shows us that the higher the value of the property, the greater the impact on the annual property tax in terms of the annual payments. This is under review, it's not confirmed. If the budget sets out the real details, I'll run fresh numbers so that you can see how it might impact you. Which would you pick? One-off stamp duty charge or a smaller annual charge? And why? I'm curious what feels fairer to you. If the budget sets real details, I'll update the calculator here. Refund trap. Let me give you an example of how people might have overpaid on stamp duty. You buy your new home before selling your old one, for example, to avoid a broken chain or secure a quick purchase. Because at that moment in time you own two properties, HMRC charges the additional 3, well actually it's now 5%, higher rates for additional dwellings surcharge. You later sell your previous main residence, so you should qualify for a refund of that surcharge. The refund rule. You must sell your former main residence within 3 years of buying your new one. Then you can claim a refund of the surcharge within 3 months of the sale, or within 12 months of your SDLT filing date, whichever is later. Claims via HMRC's online SDLT refund form takes 15 minutes. HMRC generally refunds within 15 to 30 working days. So why do so many miss out? Lack of awareness. Many buyers assume the solicitors sorted it, but they don't automatically file for refunds later. Changed conveyancers. People switch firms or move, so there's no follow-up. Time limits. After 3 years, if you still haven't sold, you lose the eligibility. Misunderstanding what counts. Your previous main residence is key. Selling a buy-to-let doesn't trigger a refund. HMRC data shows tens of thousands of refund claims annually, but many more never apply. Some estimates suggest 1 in 4 eligible homeowners miss out, especially those who forgot to check after a long overlap period. Example, new house £600,000, the stamp duty would be £20,000. With the additional 5% surcharge, it would be an additional £30,000. So total paid £50,000. If you sell your old main home within 3 years, you can claim £30,000 via HMRC's form. If you bought before you sold, you probably paid the 3 or now 5% extra. If you've since sold your main home, HMRC owes you a refund. It's not automatic, you have to claim it back, and thousands never do. Make sure you check if you're able to get a refund at gov.uk stamp duty land tax refunds.